Good day. My name is Muhammad Danish Farihin bin Ahmad Afizar. My matric card number is MC240929427. So today I'll be talking about the critical components within differentiated instruction. So I'll go through four lenses. We got readiness, then interest, learning styles, and lastly, learning environment. So I'll go beyond the definitions. I'll show why each component matters and also show an example, a practical application that I'll be using as a future educator. So, readiness. So, on surface, readiness means what the student already knows and can do. But on a critical interpretation of it, readiness is a dynamic and domain specific. A student can be ready for an advanced vocabulary work, but not for complex text analysis. So some of the practical applications that I'll be using as a future educator is as follows. First, we got pre-assessment that inform next steps. So I'll be using quick diagnostic. So for example, a 10-minute writing prompt or even a 1-minute explanation to map out student needs before unit begins. So, and then we have tiered tasks. So for tiered tasks, I'll be designing one learning goal, but for 3 access points. For example, teaching persuasive techniques are categorized into 3 tiers, which is tier 1 for support, tier 2 for on-level, tier 3 for challenge. So for tier 1, I'll be identifying persuasive words and label them in short paragraph. Tier 2, writing a report paragraph and using at least 3 persuasive techniques. And tier 3, write a persuasive piece that anticipates counter-arguments and uses data. So the main critique for readiness is that it avoids trafficking students permanently by readiness. So it rotates groups and use mates ability peer tutoring so weaker students aren't so stigmatized. And it also don't equate slow progress with low ability, as it often is a mismatch for prior knowledge of language support. Afterwards, we move on to interest. So on surface, interest can be categorized as a topics that engage student in. But on a critical interpretation of it, interest increase effort and persistence. But interest alone cannot replace sound instruction. So we must connect curriculum to student passions while keeping discipline-specific goal-centered. Some of the practical applications that I'll be using as a future educator is as follows. Interest inventories, where at the start of the terms, I use a 5-minute survey to identify what they like or dislike, their hobbies or real-world issues that they care about, and use those results to create a choice menus. Second is anchored project and mini projects. So it's a design assignment that lets students pursue individual interests, but it also requires mastery of the same standard. For example, research-based multimedia poster or oral presentation or even a podcast. Lastly is a cross-curricular links. So we use interest to bring in subjects such as math, science, or even music where it is appropriate, as this increase relevance and also depth. Some of the critiques about interest is not all interests are academic. Some may be a distraction. So the teacher's role is to channel interest toward curricular outcomes. So as teacher, we need to watch for cultural bias. So we can't assume a single set of interests for an entire class, as for each student is different from one another. And third is learning styles. So for learning style on the surface, it's a preferred ways of for students to learn. It could be either visual, auditory, or kinesthetic. But on a critical interpretation of it, matching instruction to learning styles has its own limited empirical support. So, however, the principle behind it that student benefits from multiple representations. But so rather than rigidly matching, use multimodal teaching and teach students on how to learn in each mode. So some of the practical application that I'll be using as a future educator is multimodal lesson by design. So we present new content through a short mini lesson or a graphic organizer or even a hands-on mini task. So each student will find an entry point on their own. And then we move to teach learning strategies where instead of saying you're a visual learner, teach how to convert information between modalities. So for example, how to turn paragraph into a concept map or how to explain diagrams verbally. And then we move to choice of product. So here it allows students to demonstrate mastery in different formats. So written report or recorded explanation or even an infograph. Lastly is peer teaching and stations. So here we rotate stations that appeal to different modes. It requires each student to complete at least 2 stations with learning styles. Main critique is that we can't let learning style become a label that limits students. So we use them as preference and encourage flexibility. So evidence suggests variability and practice across modalities build stronger and more transferable learning. And lastly, the last lenses is learning environment. So on the surface, learning environment can be categorized simply as a classroom layout and its own culture. So with critical interpretation of it, environment is much more than just a furniture. It includes relationship, routines, and even safety that allow differentiated instruction to work. So without psychological safety, differentiated instruction magnifies inequality or even inequity. So students who don't feel safe won't take risks required by choice or even challenge. So some of the practical application that I'll be using as a future educator is that first we have flexible physical space. So we arrange zones for quiet individual work, for example, small group or collaboration or even teacher-led mini lessons. So we rotate seating periodically to avoid fixed group identities. Second is norms for risk and feedbacks. So here we teach norms for constructive critique, collaboration, and even growth mindset languages. So here we use sentence starters and feedback protocols so students can comment productively on their peers' work. Third, we have teacher workflow and routines. So here we set up schedules of, for example, data conference, which range between either 5 to 7 or 10 to 15 minutes, is a weekly check-ins where student meets with rotating groups of students to adjust instruction. But the main critique when it comes to learning environment is that the resource is quite limited. So as not every school has flexible furniture or devices, and also start a category as small. So because it's a flexible grouping and also simple station materials. And on top of that comes the issue of monitor noise or behavior. Flexible spaces requires a very strong classroom management. So, with my final reflection as a future educator, differentiated is ethically anchored. It's about giving justice. It's about giving each learner what they need to access a high standard. But it also can be very pragmatic on its own because it requires design, it requires data, and also willingness to iterate. So my priorities as a future educator would be to start with respectful pre-assessment, to build meaningful choice, to present information in multiple ways and teach strategies, and even to create or craft a safe, flexible environment that support risk-taking. So, and then I'll move towards on measuring what supposed to be measured, measuring growth instead of final scores, instead of measuring numbers. I'll be using such things as rubrics, post or pre-checks, and also reflect on my student reflections. Lastly, I'll be sure to keep workload sustainable. I'll be using station rotations, peer leaders, and also reusable scaffolds. So differentiated instruction for me should be more of a gradual habit and not towards an overwhelming scramble. So to close today's video, differentiated instruction isn't easy, but it's very doable and necessary. If we commit to intentional design, such things as diagnosing readiness, wiring interest into learning, or varying representation and output, and building environment where students can try to fail safely, we will be making learning possible for everybody. So thank you for